Good morning, everybody. We're just about to start. I see more people coming in. Good morning, everybody. I am the substitute moderator now. Andrew McCann is traveling and is in BC with his family. His internet connection is a bit unstable, but we do have greetings from him, and he is actually going to formally open this session. So we're going to turn it over to that video.
Presentation. Basic income as a social movement. My name is Andrew McCann, and I'm a member of the Basic Income Canada Network Board. For several years, BICN and USBIG were the North American partners in organizing these conferences in person with great success. And now the movement has grown incredibly, and there are many partners involved. On behalf of BICN and BICYN, who were members of this year's planning committee, I want to welcome everyone to the virtual day into the Canadian Political Ecology series. I want to thank everyone involved in the big conference, especially our American partners who have made this all possible. US Big, Income Movement, and others, along with the generous support of our sponsors, the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, Humanity Forward Foundation, Aid Kit, and STEADY. I have an important announcement, and that is that a Canadian grade 9 student, Felix Nee, from Manitoba, has won one of the 3 prizes for the high school essay contest. Felix is registered virtually for the conference, so I hope he is here or in other sessions, and will accept our congratulations and welcome to the Basic Income Movement. Now for some housekeeping. A brief overview on how to use Crowdcast. If you would like to submit a question to the speakers, please post in the Ask a Question section down below. You may also vote on questions already posted by other attendees. This will help us determine which questions are prioritized. Next, there is a chat box where you can hold inside conversations, and this is where we will post any links and supplemental information. In order to keep things moving, we do not intend to respond to any activity in the chat, so please be sure to submit any questions using the Ask a Question function. Before I introduce the speakers for the session, well, they'll actually introduce themselves. I just want to say a few words about our decision to focus on different aspects of the political ecology of the basic income movement. With the work that so many people have done in different ways, we are now at a point where we've evolved from theory, awareness, evidence, and policy design, and these are all important still, obviously, not only foundationally, but moving forward, to a place where political action is our priority as a movement. To be effective, we need to understand how a political ecology works. What that means is all the different actors in the system, whether it's politicians themselves, political candidates like in the recent election, public servants, bureaucrats, members of the media, academics, other organizations in civil society, everyday voters of all classes and diverse backgrounds. Obviously, we can't understand a complete political ecology, but to orient yourself, to be able to enter into that political ecology, to that landscape of people who are involved in this case, the possibility of making basically some public policy in Canada. That's what these sessions ambitiously hope to approach. What's the purpose of that? Well, first of all, when we enter into movements, when we enter into any type of activity as humans, getting that lay of the land is fundamentally important, obviously. Second of all, that's kind of a descriptive function, right? And an orientation. But in terms of action and accomplishing and moving this forward to make a basic income a reality in Canada, that is where you really start to understand what the controversies are, what the pressure points can be, how power operates in the human ecology of the political system that can make basic income happen. For example, we've pivoted from lobbying politicians, which is still fundamentally important, to trying to create voter pressure on politicians in Canada by broadening and turning our movement into more of a grassroots movement with broader support across the country. So that's a basic overview. And within that approach to the basic income movement, the speakers today, starting with Elaine and Jamie Swift, Elaine Power and Jamie Swift, will be introducing their point of view in the system, shedding light on how it operates from their perspective. So thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoy it as much as I am going to, and Ben and Earl and Chelsea will be speaking afterwards, but everybody will introduce themselves, and I look forward to it, and I hope you the conference and the session.
Hannah, I wonder if I could share my screen. I've got a PowerPoint presentation. Jamie, while we're waiting, Can everyone see the PowerPoint now?
Not just yet.
Okay.
Hannah, I don't think Ben and I will need to be on screen right now either.
Mm-hmm.
We'll let Elaine and Jamie go first.
There you go.
Jamie, maybe
That's a
do you wanna,
frightening close-up.
do you want to introduce yourself, Jamie? While
I could introduce myself in the hopes that the PowerPoint presentation comes up in the course of my 17-minute personal biography. I'm Jamie Swift. I live with Elaine Power here in Kingston, Ontario. And I'm a writer by trade. I've been involved in the basic income movement for about 9-10 years or so, with our Kingston Action Group for the Basic Income Guarantee. And Elaine and I wrote a book that came out last year called The Case for Basic Income. So that's enough for me. Maybe Elaine could introduce herself. And in the interim, maybe we'll get the slideshow.
I hope so. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Jamie and I are in Kingston, or Catawaqui, the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people. With Jamie, we're founding members of the Kingston Action Group for a Basic Income Guarantee, and I teach at Queen's University, especially social determinants of health, which has really informed my perspective on basic income, as well as my research on food insecurity. And we're hoping in our allotted 15 minutes to kind of go through some of the history that's formed and shaped the political ecology of the basic income movement in Canada. And even though you can't see my PowerPoint slide, I think I'm going to start just so that we don't spend too much time waiting. We wanted to start with actually the 1960s, starting in the middle part of the 1960s. And of course, there's a previous history, but in Canada, we had in 1966, the introduction of Medicare, the Medical Care Act, the introduction of the Guaranteed Income Supplement in 1967, which topped up the old age security and made it possible for especially people without any other income to live better. That was again improved in the 1970s and is really our first example of a basic income in Canada. And 1967, Martin Luther King in the US endorsed a guaranteed annual income, as it was popularly known as then. 1968, Robert Stanfield, who was the progressive conservative, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, endorsed a guaranteed income. In 1970, we had the Royal Commission on the Status of Women recommending a guaranteed annual income. Then we had the report, the Special Senate Committee on Poverty, which also recommended a guaranteed annual income. In 1972, we had the Wages for Housework campaign and the United Church of Canada endorsing guaranteed annual income. So we can see over a really short period, 5 or 6 years, that there was quite a lot of activity around basic income or guaranteed annual income. And I think that's important an important place to start, because some of the people who are currently involved in basic income in Canada remember that time. It's also part of our history, so that people involved in basic income kind of look back at that and think about the possibilities. If you could see my PowerPoint slide, I have a very nice graph that shows the tremendous decline in poverty after the GIS improvements in the early 1970s. So seniors poverty in particularly fell from, for singles, mostly older women, the poverty rate fell from almost 70% way down to about 10%. And it fell quite dramatically as those improvements were put in place. And of course, 1974 was the launch of the MINCOM experiment, which I imagine most people here have heard about. Evelyn Forget has talked about being a student, an undergraduate student, and in that time, in that era, and learning about MINCOM and kind of wondering what had happened to the data in the early 2000s when she became a medical, she was a medical economist working in the health sciences in Winnipeg. And so, that her work, MinCom, and her work has really had a huge impact on the political ecology of basic income in Canada. And so that history is something that is almost like the soil in which the current seeds of the basic income movement were planted. And the next slide is a lovely, delightful picture of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And maybe, Jamie, you could talk about why they're significant.
Elaine, it's Ben. I'm going to
Yeah.
share your slides for you right now. I just had to get Hannah to help me coordinate that. So
Oh,
I'm sharing your
perfect.
slides.
Thanks.
1 second.
Okay, I
Okay.
would just, in the interim, while the slides are coming up, emphasize Elaine started off with the first bit of the first slide about the introduction of Medicare in Canada and subsequent improvements in public provision. Important for basic income advocates to be clear on the fact that Medicare, public provision of healthcare in Canada, had significant institutional backing from political party, in this case, the Social Democratic Party, the New Democratic Party as it was, as it had become, institutions like trade unions and churches, and it was a fairly significant, solid, and increasingly influential social movement that allowed that paved the way for that. And I think it would be safe to say that at this point in basic income promotion, we do not have that yet. So maybe in the division of labor here, with respect to Elaine and I could be the Eeyore and she could be the Pollyanna. So we could be careful not to get too carried away with how far basic income has come, but we should still continue to underline the major steps forward that have been made in the past 15 or 20 years. So I assume the slide of Reagan and Thatcher is up.
There you go.
So that was a watershed moment, the late 70s, early 80s, the rise of neoliberalism, or as I prefer to call it, market fundamentalism, because I think if you're talking about the broad masses of workers and peasants here in Canada and the United States, the term neoliberalism is probably doesn't have a lot of traction, but fundamentalism, and in this case, market fundamentalism, truly does have a lot of traction. So since I can't see the slides,
Just if you want to tell me when to go next, I can.
keep going. Go down to about number 6 or 7.
Yeah, number 5 is the one of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan,
Okay.
and which is kind of a fun visual. I mean, they were having a lot of fun destroying the social safety net, it seems. Yeah, we just
so
have a ton of slides.
The next slide, which I have in another place, is a quick recap of the period of, the early 2000s, 2005 to 2014. An important event, Hugh Siegel used his appointment to the Senate to promote basic income. The BICN that Sheila is a major player in was founded in 2008. And at the same time, Evelyn's work on MinCom started to get a lot of attention. The Cooper Institute in PEI, and we may be able to mention PEI later on, started to focus on basic income. Our group here in Kingston was founded in 2013, and there was the Big Push campaign, the Ontario Basic Income Network, founded in 2014. And along the way, important institutions, and I mentioned institutions before, Canadian mayors endorsed big, the CMA, the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Public Health Association, and the Canadian Association of Social Workers. And our next slide, I believe, talks about the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit, which was a great leap forward, if you will, to borrow something from Mao Zedong. Dramatic reduction in poverty and child poverty in Canada brought in by the Liberal government in 2015. And so that is something that we need to look at in terms of a what you might call a Pollyanna moment of poverty reduction here in Canada. And I'm sure there are people in the audience who know a lot more about that than I do. I noticed Sid Frankel's with us following that in 2017. And we like to tell ourselves here in Kingston that our group had some small role to play in the Ontario Basic Income pilot project, which was introduced in 2017, keeping in mind that the Liberal government that had introduced it, the Liberal Party that had introduced it, had been in office for 14 years, and it took them that long to get their act together to do something about basic income. And in the meantime, they'd only tinkered very tentatively and incrementally with social assistance rates and social assistance in general. So I'll toss it over to Elaine now.
Okay. I just wanted to, Ben, is it possible to advance the slides? Because we're just seeing the title slide.
They're moving. I'm on like slide 8 in my thing.
Oh, okay. Well, all I can see is the beginning, so I don't know if others can see something different, but
Hi, this is Hannah the tech. Ben, maybe you can restart the screen share.
Yep.
Thanks, Hannah. So just going back to the Canada child. Oh, that's great. Okay. And then if we could have the next slide, please.
Yep.
We had as many of you will know, we had the basic income pilot for a very short time. It was announced in the budget in 2016. It was studied in 2017, and it rolled out in started rolling out in 2017 in the fall. Even though it was a very short time that it actually ran, the headline here from the Toronto Star, from barely thriving to thriving, I think kind of sums up the results, as I say, in a very short time. Even the basic income pilot amount was set at 75% of the poverty line, so it didn't even get to the poverty line, but it was about double what people were getting on social assistance. And we actually used, Jamie and I used the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, did interviews with people, and went to Hamilton and Lindsay, which are two of the sites, to write the book. So there's lots more in the book about the impact that it had both on individuals and families and their communities. So if we could have the next slide, please. We had an election just about less than a year, or maybe about a year after the rollout. And although the new Ford government in 2018 had, during the election campaign, had promised to continue the pilot, one of their first acts was actually to cut the pilot, to a great outroar of protest. This was from a press conference where some people would say the positioning of Minister MacLeod and the sign behind her was her real message to live in poverty, as opposed to the fuller sign, which said 1 in 7 Ontarians live in poverty. And actually just this week, we learned some good news that a class action lawsuit that was launched by some of the pilot participants who were cut off because of the government's action. That class action lawsuit has been allowed to move forward after an initial ruling that it wouldn't be certified. So that's a bit of good news.
At this point, I'm often called upon to restrain Elaine from saying extremely rude things about the Premier of Ontario, Mr. Ford, and more particularly his former Minister of Community Social Services, who was left out of the cabinet and quit in a hissy fit just yesterday. She's taking a break from politics, although she's still receiving her MPP salary.
Yes, yes, my favorite politician. Next slide, please, Ben. And please and thank you. There's so much that's happened since 2018, and in a perverse way. I mean, it was horrible that the 4,000 people who were on the pilot had the rug pulled out from under them, but it kind of that perverse silver lining. It did actually raise the profile of basic income, the decision to cancel it, and so much in the last 4 years. There's been so much that has gone on. We had a panel in British Columbia that was stacked with people who didn't support basic income, present a 400+ page report actually rejecting the idea for the province of BC. We've had the Parliamentary Budget Officer twice do a study of the costs of basic income. We know that there's a tremendous amount of support from the both, particularly obviously the provincial Liberals, but also the federal Liberals. And this is just a small smattering of headlines. And Ben, if you could go to the next slide. The other big event, of course, in the political ecology of basic income in Canada was the pandemic and the incredibly rapid rollout of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and our hope that it could be turned into a permanent basic income. Unfortunately, the federal government seems disinclined to do that. But the fact that the Fraser Institute, which is a very conservative, politically conservative, neoliberal policy institute, that it caught the attention of the Fraser Institute, I guess, again, is one of those perverse signs of success. Next slide, please. And so at this current moment, we have a group of incredible economists and civil servants, including Evelyn Forget, working on a plan for Prince Edward Island to be a demonstration site for a basic income pilot. They don't want to use the word pilot, but in any case, they're developing a plan, so it's ready to go. Just needs federal funding. That's perhaps one of the most hopeful things in the national scene right now. We have these two incredible champions of basic income, Kim Pate in the Senate and Leah Gazan in the House of Commons, who are trying to push the federal government to at least develop a framework for basic income. And we have Bill C-22, which is probably not going to pass through the House of Commons, but it's basically to promote there's a Canada Disability Benefit, which has pros and cons in my from my perspective. But if we have the next slide, please, Ben, we see that the Prime Minister in particular is not a fan of basic income. There's lots of speculation about why that is. Jamie, do you want to?
I can point out that, as we pointed out on previous slide, the BC NDP, although in the party there may be significant support for basic income, their basic income panel, as Elaine suggested, it had at least one member who was definitely on record as opposing basic income before the panel arrived. The Trudeau government, the Trudeau Liberals, there's support for basic income inside the party, but the party hierarchy and the big players are, as this slide shows, they're not in support. The same with the NDP in Ontario. Here in Ontario, they've never been too keen on basic income. And so I think that's an important signpost. Now, it could be that in an upcoming Manitoba election, I noticed in the chat somebody from Manitoba has weighed in. Maybe that will be a shift if the NDP does prevail in the next provincial election in Manitoba. So there's this tension in political parties around basic income. It's safe to say that only the Green Party has really been consistently in support of basic income, and they're not a major player at this point. So I'll leave it to Elaine to continue.
Okay, we just have a couple more slides with a few quotes that kind of sum up where we are. Ben, if you could move to the next slide. We have Dr. Danielle Martin, a prominent physician in Toronto, who is speaking of MinCom and Evelyn's work on MinCom, said if we could find a drug that reduced hospital admissions by 8.5%, we'd put it in the water. Next slide, we have a quote from Milton Friedman, basically saying we need a crisis in order to implement real change. And we want basic income to be lying around, ready to sprout when the big crisis comes. And finally, just yesterday, Hugh Segal has said we are still on an incline and the shrubs and trip branches from the usual suspects remain, but my sense is that pace and progress is quickening. And with that, I have the final slide is just shows some of the key players right now on the scene in Canada, and I'll hand it over to Chelsea and Ben with apologies for running over. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jamie and Elaine. We are running short on time. We also, because it took us a little while to get going, we can also, if we're all okay with this, run a little bit over. I want to make sure that we are able to make their presentation. We may unfortunately not have a lot of time for Q&A, but as Canadians, there are lots of opportunities, hopefully, for us to get together and people can connect with organizations. Ben and Chelsea.
Okay. Thank you. And then I'm just gonna, oh, where am I? I am going to share my screen. And Chelsea are going to, oh, we're gonna go to the slide. Sorry. Gotta get back to our beginning. Sorry about that.
Just consider this a quick little preview.
I know. So Chelsea and I are going to.
I think we need to introduce ourselves.
No, I guess we should do that. Very quickly, I'm Ben Earl. I am the general manager of both UBIWorks and BICN. I work for both organizations in that capacity. Many of you have met me. If you're in Canada, you've met me through some of the National Forum work, if you've done that, or other places. And if you haven't met me through there, this is your introduction to me and the work that I've been doing on the basic income movement. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Chelsea. Quickly.
And I'm Chelsea Stevens. I am the Community Success Manager at UBIWorks, and I help with things like marches and community development within the movement. So I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So against the sort of context that Elaine and Jamie set, we're going to speak more specifically to work that has been ongoing especially over the past 12 months, a bit longer than that, but really come to a head over the past 12 months to solidify the action of the movement in the context that Jamie and Elaine just spoke to. And really what this is a presentation of the Basic Income Now campaign and action movement, which has been a call of action that has been set up and organized over the past 12 months or so. So this is a campaign coordinated by Canada's leading basic income organizations and our allies. It has the goal of building the support for basic income at the national and provincial levels, and it does this by creating and enacting campaigns of public support that are played out at the local riding level and at the community level across Canada. So this is the goal of what it's trying to do. These are the main groups that are driving it down there. Basic Income Canada Network, Coalition Canada, Revenue de Base Quebec, BIC, Basic Income Canada Youth Network, OBIN, and UBIWorks. It includes, though, while these are the main groups that do the day-to-day work, a lot of the heavy lifting is done by many local and provincial groups across the country to enact the actions that have around the federal and provincial elections, the recent provincial election in Ontario, most specifically. So the whole thinking behind this and the theory of change behind the Basic Income Now movement, and this actually stems from the early work that UBIWorks undertook. And it's interesting, UBIWorks sort of came out of you talk about motivating people to action. UBIWorks was driven by motivations that came out of the cancellation of the basic income pilot and came out of our founder, Floyd Marinescu's work around CEOs for basic income. And he moved forward with setting up and bringing a group together to create UBIWorks and start working with others in the movement. So some of that context that Elaine and Jamie spoke to did drive the creation of new organizations to help bring people together around basic income. And this is the general theory of change that drives sort of UBIWorks originally, but now basic income now as a movement, is that we have this idea that the more support we drive, that we demonstrate from voters, we can drive and grow political support. And then in a cyclical environment, the more support we can show at the political end can drive voter and public support. If they know that this is something their elected officials and candidates are interested in, it starts to see a little bit more ray of hope, and there's growing public support, and vice versa as well. If there's voter support for basic income, you start to see growing political support. How did we set up the Basic Income Now movement? And I'm just going to quickly go through a few of the things that we've done. The biggest thing that we did is we set up a common identity. It did revolve around branding and creating opportunities to demonstrate publicly your support. You can see it's very colorful. That's the point, is meant to be visible and seen. We use lots of colors to also indicate the inclusiveness of the movement and to sort of show so that we can be, it's bright and vivid and can be seen publicly no matter what way that it's being done. And this then solidifies the thinking behind the movement as well, behind a common branding and a common identity. This has been played out in things like lawn signs. We had lawn sign campaign for the federal, especially for the federal election. And this happened in communities across Canada where people gathered lawn signs. We had very specific campaigns where groups got together in some communities like Kingston and Stratford, Ontario. Groups got together and distributed lawn signs. It happened across the country. So we had this opportunity for people to show their support the same way they would for political parties. And this was just sort of the beginning of ways that people could get involved and start showing that basic income was important to them during a campaign period. And again, it was that common imaging and branding that sort of showed that this was a collective action of these groups. We had the basic income marches. There was the basic income marches in September heading towards the federal election. These occurred in cities across the country, Montreal, Regina, Victoria, even in Whitehorse. And then in Toronto, there was a march in September ahead of the federal election, and there was recently a march in May starting at the park behind Queen's Park in Toronto ahead of the provincial election. Again, ways to demonstrate that groups are gathering and that this is an important issue. These groups had participation ranging from 30 individuals at the low end all the way to just over 200 participating in the Toronto March, which is groups getting together to show and publicly show their support for basic income in a way heading into an election period. And we did have participation from some candidates coming to speak and engage during some of these marches, especially in Toronto. And the biggest piece of the Basic Income Now campaign, again, a way of mobilizing our movement. And we know that, again, I just want to note that we know this is not the only thing that needs to be done. This is done on the backdrop of a lot of the policy work that's happening, the work that's going on in PEI, a lot of the writing that's going on. But this is a way to show, to signal that voter support and signal public support. So through marches, signs, other types of branding, but also through this Push Your Candidates campaign, where groups like UBIWorks and BICN and our partners in the Youth Network and Coalition Canada sent out messages getting our supporters to push their candidates to pledge their support for basic income during the election periods. And we did this in the federal election and in the recent Ontario election. And these messages went out to between 80 and 90,000 individuals across all the lists that we have. So that's 80 and 90 subscribers to various basic income organizations who these messages went out to, and we asked to engage in the process by demonstrating their interest and getting their candidates to pledge their support for basic income. And this was nonpartisan. This was meant to be targeted to all candidates across all parties. This was not targeted to any one group or individual party. It was targeted to all candidates, asking them to make the pledge. Okay. I'm now going to pass quickly over to Chelsea to speak to the other part that we did during the campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things that we did were riding level meetups across Ontario ahead of the provincial campaign or the provincial election. So we held riding level meetups across 9 cities in major areas within Ontario, starting with the pilot ridings that were part of that Ontario basic income pilot, and also including Ottawa, Toronto, Oxford, Middlesex, and Elgin counties, as well as Waterloo, and then culminating in an Ontario-wide online forum where we could talk about the individual actions that people could take. So signs, shirts, like Ben mentioned, but also volunteering for basic income champions. And we explained the Basic Income Now movement. We explained basic income to those who were new, and then also really encouraged local action and local organizing. So campaigns are able in that kind of way to get volunteers. Signs can go up and be handed out by people. It encourages people to talk to their neighbors and really encourages local groups to be created. And if you flip to the next slide, we can see that when there are strong local groups, you end up with things like this all candidates meeting that took place in Kingston. So the Kingston Action Group for Basic Income that Elaine and Jamie are part of is a very well-organized organization. And because of that, they are able to do local work. So in this case, they did an all candidates meeting where they had people from the Conservative, Liberal, Green, and NDP parties there to talk about basic income with that same basic income branding that Ben touched on earlier. So we also had 2 of those participants sign the basic income pledge, which you can then see on the next slide. And yeah, we can go to the next slide now. So these are some of the thumbnails that were made for the basic income pledge. And the idea was to share updates with about political support with voters who were potentially going to vote for them. The thumbnails were created for each candidate, and they included things like a quote from the candidate if it was provided, the party affiliation, the candidate's name, and the riding or electoral district that they're from. So these were all created usually within a day of them signing the pledge by our amazing graphic designer, Philippe. But you can see we use these for both the federal and provincial election, and we can go a little bit more into that on the next slide. I think it's the next one. There we go. So this is for the federal election. You can see 3 of our major basic income advocates. Oh, back one, sorry. The other slide has Leah Gazan, Julie Zerowitz, and Mike Morris. For the federal campaign in 2021, we had 189 candidates take the Basic Income Now pledge, which meant that people from their communities could reach out to them via email or via Twitter or whatever other way they could get in touch with them and say, hey, I want you to advocate for basic income on my behalf because you're part of my riding. And we would send those emails out to all of the candidates in a specific riding. So for the federal election, 189 of those candidates took the pledge from primarily from the 3 or only from the 3 leading parties, which was the NDP, the Liberals, and the Green Party. 15 candidates who signed that pledge were elected, but we had candidates in 46% of Canadian ridings take the pledge for basic income. And then there were 29 more additional candidates who were elected but didn't sign the pledge in this case, which means that in the federal government, we have over 40 people who are basic income advocates or basic income supporters, which is exciting. And on the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the Ontario election specifically. So for the Ontario election, you can see, again, we had people from the 3 leading parties. That's the NDP, the Liberals, and the Green Party. In this election, we had about 123 candidates take part, but that was 101 ridings across Ontario, or 81% of the total ridings in the province of Ontario. And we ended up having 6 candidates who signed the pledge elected and 9 more candidates elected who didn't sign the pledge, but who have publicly supported basic income. So this is good in a couple of ways. One, it encouraged people to volunteer for candidates that they might have not necessarily volunteered for previously, because it showed them who the closest basic income advocates to them were, particularly those who signed the pledge. We also use this to advocate for candidates and say, hey, these are the candidates in your riding who have signed the pledge. If you're looking for a different candidate and they haven't signed the pledge, now's a great time to tell them to. And so it really let people see, the voters see, who these basic income advocates were, and who they should support.
Okay, so I'll just wrap up
And
with
we
this.
shared those. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so we'll wrap up with this. The main point of the Basic Income Now campaign was to, one, enact our theory of change in a way, but also to by creating these connections, linking voters and candidates and those running for election and their elected officials. We had this effect of creating a constituency of voters who publicly stated that basic income gets their vote, which was with the key goal of this, to show that those running for office that this is an issue that matters to people in Canada and matters to those who are voting for them. And as Chelsea noted, we had people show up who were not generally aligned with any the voters who were not aligned generally with any particular party, but were connected by the cause of basic income. And they used this experience to show up for candidates, and in some cases volunteer for candidates that they couldn't even vote for because they were in ridings outside of their own home riding. And this was a very strong demonstration of this issue, that this issue matters to Canadians, to many candidates. And the last thing I'll note is this was done in the backdrop of an election with one of the lowest voter turnouts, the provincial election, one of the lowest voter turnouts in Canadian electoral history, yet we were still able to engage candidates and individuals around this issue across the province in this. So we've got our learnings from this. The goal is to now take this model and talk to other jurisdictions, especially other provinces, about how they can enact similar campaigns at the local level as well. And we're even having conversations about upcoming municipal elections. There's municipal elections coming up in Ontario and other places as well, about how, if there's any use for a similar type of approach at that level. Okay, so we will stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, everyone. Obviously, there is so much more conversation that's needed. We have pretty much run out of time. There is one question from Sid that we might get to, but maybe I'll do a couple of housekeeping things really, really quickly first, so that people know what's next. First of all, thanks for this. Everybody who's participated in every way in this session. The recording will be available on the link that got you here. There's a lunch break coming up, but before that, just wanted to mention, so we've got this whole Canadian political ecology series, because there are things about our countries that are different. The next plenary is about supporting babies, ending child poverty. And it's largely American focused because they're working towards policies that we already have in Canada. So what we are hoping to do during that plenary for any Canadians who are interested is to join a Zoom session that I hope Ben's going to be able to set up for us really easily, to talk about intersectionality in the Canadian movement. It'll be very informal, more a chance to have some open conversation. And I think that's all I need to say. Please check the website for, or the conference schedule for anything else people are interested in. And final plug, go to basicincomenow.ca, find out about all of the organizations if you're not a member of one already, and see where you fit, see what looks interesting from a national, provincial, territorial, or local perspective. So I am going to then turn, if we can have 2 more minutes, the question that Sid has put in the question box, which is, was the post-war family allowance the first basic income in Canada? It was introduced primarily to stimulate aggregate demand and attract women's votes. many of whom got used to an income during the wartime labor market. Does this tell us anything about strategy? So is there anybody who wants to answer in like 10 or 15 seconds? With my apologies. Are others, can other panelists turn their mics and cameras back on? Do we need assistance for that? Perfect. Okay. I don't see Elaine. Okay. Does anybody want to jump in and answer, provide an answer to that question? Elaine wants to, but
I think that's definitely something that Elaine could answer. So I'm gonna turn off my video and hopefully that means she can come back on.
Elaine is coming and Jamie's been having trouble hearing. I hope others haven't had that problem. Oh, we could hear your keyboard, Jamie. And Elaine, I think, is being invited up. But I don't see her yet. Ben, do you want to take a crack at answering? Like,
well,
really briefly, we've got to set up the next session in like 3 months.
Yeah. So
It's
let
like,
me.
There's Elaine. Okay.
There's Elaine. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank God.
Oh, Elaine.
I think it's probably a rhetorical question on Sid's part. But what I'd like to use it for is to point out sometimes. So the Sid's question was about the what we call the baby bonus and the post-family allowance. And I think, yes, we could think of it as a basic income. It actually had some pretty regressive effects, though, because it was part of a strategy to get women back in the kitchen, get women back in the household. And from some other research I've done, it was actually also used to deny a universal school meal program for school kids. So part of the rationale was that, you know, families were now getting this money and it would be better for kids from home at lunch. And one of the things that really concerns me in the political ecology of basic income right now is the reinforcement of the division between the so-called deserving and undeserving. So, you know, we have seniors who have a basic income, we have children who have a basic income, where there's all this advocacy for disability basic income, which, you know, I don't have any problem with on its own, but by hiving off the so-called undeserving, the people on social assistance who are not on disability, I think it's potentially very dangerous and will take the pressure off not a universal, but a basic income that covers everybody who needs it. So I think we need to be really careful about in thinking about unintended consequences and perhaps motivations that are not progressive.
Thank you, Elaine. And I think that's a perfect segue into getting ready for the intersection workshop that's coming next. So I think we're going to end here. Thank you. I want to thank everybody so much for participating. And yeah, keep joining the sessions to come. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.